We're Smooth 98.1 FM. Good morning and welcome to Business Express. I've been joined this morning by the ever smiling, beautiful Callista, Chileke, consumer goods analyst, ARM Securities this morning. Welcome.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here.
All right, so let's pick up the pace this morning because from what I see, an article from Nairametrics seems to be leading with this one. It talks about how Nestle reports a 104 billion naira loss in 2023 as shareholders' funds wiped out. It looks like this. So you would help us get a better perspective of this. So let's talk about the top line growth. What will you make of Nestle's revenues in 2023 and the contribution from the food and beverages?
Okay, so specifically, we saw that Nestle's revenue grew by 22.45% year on year to 547.12 billion naira. And when you compare this to the increase in 2022, you can see that in 2022, it increased by 27%. This increase in Nestle's revenue in 2023 is attributed to increases in both its food and beverage product segment. So for the food segment, we saw that it increased by 30.04% year on year to 353.7 billion naira. And for the beverage segment, so that it increased by 10.63% year on year to 193.42 billion naira. And these increases in the food and beverage product segment is probably as a result of price adjustments the company carried out following inflationary pressures in the economy. We've seen many consumer goods companies adopt this strategy in order to boost revenue and reduce the impact of inflation on their revenue, their top line growth. Yeah.
Well, I just need to get back to the listener. You also can be part of the conversation this morning if you send us a WhatsApp message onto 0809 will be where we hope to read the messages. But of course, you can catch up the live stream this morning also on youtube.com/smooth 981 FM Lagos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, leave a comment there. We'll pick them up as we get along on the show. Let's get on to finance cost for the firm grew by as much as 1,000%. That's to about 233 billion naira. What was the reason for this?
Wow. Finance cost actually grew by 1,037.1% year on year and is on the back of increased interest expenses. So interest expense on financial liabilities skyrocketed to about 203% year on year to 38.4 billion naira. And this increase in interest expense um and this increase in finance cost, outweighed the 19.1% year-on-year growth in finance income. And I believe that this as a result of Naira rapidly depreciating and Nestle had to revalue their financial obligations, and this drove finance costs up to the levels that they recorded.
Now, looking at the report once more, it talks about total expenses amounting to as much as 423 billion naira, and 67% of that came from raw materials, purchase, finished goods, and consumables. Why is that the line item so high?
Well, cost of production for Nestle was about 13.4% year on year, and following a surge in cost of raw materials by 27% year on year. Interestingly, the company's financial statement stated that they make use of local raw materials such as soya beans, maize, cocoa, palm oil, sorghum, cassava, and the rest, right? And these many of these raw materials are included in their production process. And you see that these raw materials are majorly produced in the northern part of the country where we are facing serious security challenges. See, farmers are scared of going to the farm. And in addition to that, the cost of transporting these raw materials down to the south is very high. And this we believe that these are major contributors to the significant rise in Nestle's cost of raw materials in 2023.
But again, one might argue that it's still trying to probe into this high cost of that in that subsector of the report, looking at it from that angle, these things are locally sourced, not like they're imported into the country. One would not expect they'd be at this high, the figures we're getting.
Yeah, well, we're seeing food inflation as well. Food inflation is majorly impacted by transport costs and structural issues, basically like inadequate infrastructure, insecurity in the northern in the food producing regions of the country. So all these contribute and culminate into higher costs and food inflation as a whole.
So, in order to stay in business, when companies experience this kind of issues in their areas of production, how do they really respond in order to stay in business?
How do they respond to stay in business? Well, the thing is that they can continue to locally. You see, the problem is from the structural angle, right? If there is no security, there's no way they can be able to get these things down from the north to the south. And to import turning to importation, we will now see forex losses that Nestle so it's a is a two-headed dragon, really.
Which leads us to foreign exchange losses amounted to as much as 195 billion naira. Can we attribute this to devaluation in 2023?
Of course, we can. The division of the Naira 2023 played a major role in FX losses, not only in Nestle but many consumer companies in during the year, as they had to reevaluate, like I said earlier, their foreign currency obligations, and this negatively impacted their profit after tax. For Nestle, it brought the profit after tax or net income loss, actually net loss, to about 93.06 billion naira. So for the devaluation of the naira is could actually played a major role in forex losses that were recorded during the year.
But in spite of Nestle looking out for local materials in its production, it would come across that consumer goods in Nigeria are quite import dependent. Will we ever see a day where we can fully source these materials locally?
But we've seen some companies in the sector, they have listed backward integration as a strategy to reduce FX losses, right? But how many of them are actually implementing that? So before these companies can get their raw materials locally, Nigerian industries have to be working, farmers need to be going to the farm. And something even as simple as going to the farm to get farm produce needed for production is continually being hampered by insecurity in some of our states. So a lot of things need to be put in place before companies can fully source their raw materials locally. There's even a case of our mindset even. So there are some people who still believe that Nigerian made products are inferior to foreign made counterparts. So all this play a part in the issue.
So this will now lead us to the question of inflation still being the headwind facing consumer goods manufacturers in the country, or is it the foreign exchange? Which of the two devils would be, if you say you could point out as a culprit here?
Well, I think they are both giants. They are both giants facing the consumer goods sector. Inflation is putting pressure on their revenue by increasing cost of production, and FX volatility issues within the country is putting pressure on their bottom line revenue through importation costs. So these two are more like evil twins fashioned against the consumer goods sector. And if you're now throwing high interest rates, perfect combination. What do you think?
And when you look at what's the latest monetary, the MPR that has been released right now, what does that say?
Exactly.
Is it looking like
Exactly.
reprieve anywhere in sight?
Well, there are certain policies that the CBN is trying to put in place to boost FX supply, right? So I think if those policies can, show huge results in the short to medium term, I feel like there will be some respite for the consumer goods sector.
All right, let's get back to the listener that's applied this morning to let them know we can read messages if they come in as we're getting ready to pack up the show this morning. Send messages relating to the conversation this morning, as we've got our guest still here with me, Callista Chileke, helping us make meaning of Nestle's Nigeria's report saying that 104 billion naira loss in 2023, and that's off of Nairametrics article. So we're trying to get all of those broken down. So let's get back to it once again. Inflation is still the biggest issue here. So let's get inflation out of the way. What about purchasing power of the consumer? That's what we're looking at. How does that factor into challenges in the consumer goods sector of the country?
Well, you cannot really take inflation away, right? Inflation is really high at the moment. As of January 2024, it was 29.90%. And this is impacting consumer purchasing power, right? But these consumer goods companies, many of them at least, are able to increase their prices. And in most cases, like we've talked about here before, shrinkflation, right? To
Ah, there
reduce
you go.
so reduce the size of the product while selling at a much higher price. Sometimes you realize I bought something recently and it just seems like every time I go out to buy something, I'm just surprised every time at the price, right? So this strategy that this consumer goods sector companies are implementing
Mhm.
is for them to hedge against inflation that is washing away their top line revenue. So yeah, inflation is a major or has is having major impact on the consumer goods sector.
That because I was going to not mention shrinkflation because I know that you introduced that term in one of our editions, and but it looks like the one of the last results for consumer producers, like okay, since the top line is so high, what do we
Yeah,
do? We're just going to respond by adding more air into whatever it is they're buying and then give it to them.
exactly. Yeah.
So finally, let's throw this one in as we wrap up your trade this morning. It's almost empty. What kind of 2024 consumer goods firm? What do really this firms? What do they have ahead of them this year? If you want to give a projection.
We are cautiously optimistic about the sector because of, as we've mentioned, we've been discussing most of the time inflationary pressures and FX challenges. But we see that these players keep on increasing their prices. However, this could only work effectively for companies with very essential products or strong competitive advantage or strong brand loyalty. And as I've mentioned before, the with the CBN recent policies to boost FX supply and
Mm.
curb inflation rates, we could see some, respite in that sector. Overall, we'll advise that investors position themselves in tickers with strong fundamentals and, robust fundamentals. Yeah.
It comes down to a message I'm looking at right now from one of our listener, the client here, Fine Oluboroko comes up with a message and it tells me this saying, I rather think that either our farmers or the middlemen are exploiting us. How can you tell me that because dollar is getting higher and higher, then the price of gari or yam will also be very high by the same level of the dollar rose to? I can't wrap my head around that. What's happening with the farm produce? This is what Fine Oluboroko seem just can't get enough of. Like, what's really happening?
But if you think about it, many of these sellers of these products that are not supposedly being affected by the dollar. When they sell their produce, they eventually use their proceeds from those sales to buy something that is actually being affected by the dollar. So they have to protect themselves. So that is the well, Nigerians now we have business sense.
Oh, I see. That takes us to oh, Ty's here. Ty's message is written. I was just good. Okay. Tyre comes up with a message saying Federal Nigeria FCMG will package air and sell it to you because they are responding to cost shrinkflation. In other words, so
Well, that is shrinkflation, as you said. Reduce the size or package air, like Tyler said, and
mhm,
then increase the cost. So everybody is trying to just protect themselves from this harsh economy that we're all facing.
passing
Unfortunately, it's the
on.
consumers that are, bearing the brunt of it all.
So if everybody looks for a way to pass the burden, as they say in economics now, pass the burden of the cost
Yeah.
onto somebody, who would the consumer pass on the burden of the cost is bearing? So we just can't pass it. We just bear it
I'm
that
not
way.
saying this, but the final consumer, that's why we're called final.
All right. Well, once again, so in summary, dreams, they say, don't work unless you do, right?
Yes, they don't. They
And
don't.
this is how we get to conclude the show this morning. I've been speaking with Callista Chileke, Consumer Goods Analyst, ARM Securities. Thank you so much for speaking with and helping us
Thank
make
you.
meaning of this report this morning. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.